Welcome to today's show. I'm actually starting this a little differently today because I'm thinking about changing the name of the podcast because I've been so focused on weight training because that is, I think, the missing piece for so many women that I think I'm going to change the name of the podcast to something more around strength training in midlife. Yeah, so it may get confusing if I'm calling it 40 plus fitness for women, and then all of a sudden it's the strength training and midlife podcast. But anyway, I'm still Lynn Sitterloff Airisto and a menopause fitness coach here to help you get stronger and stay fit in midlife. And today we are going to talk about something that, of course, everybody is interested in when they start weight training, which is how quickly am I going to see results? And how can I make myself get results faster? And I think this is a really important topic because you see people on social media, women on social media, and of course you think, oh, I want to look like that. And often, actually, you are seeing them and thinking, okay, they're showing this exercise or that exercise, and that must be the kind of exercise that has gotten them to be in that good a shape. And that's not always the case. So I want to remind you of that, that it's not always that the exercise that they're showing has actually gotten them looking the way they do. In fact, I think it is far too common, especially when we're talking about targeting midlife women, where the women have exercises, they show you exercises that are quote unquote full body exercises where they're using medium or smallish dumbbells. They're sweating, it's kind of cardio at the same time. And yet these women are toned and firm looking, and they're actually strength training on the side. But they know that strength training doesn't sell. You know, women don't want to start strength training. And so they are selling what people want to buy, which is these kinds of full body, sweaty, cardio with weights kind of workouts. And that's really annoying. And then the other part of that is that a lot of these women have amazing genetics, right? You see, for example, I don't know, they're like Pilates strength instructors, and they're like, oh, just do what I'm doing and you're going to look like me. And their legs are like, you know, the 5 feet long, and they're a former ballerina and all these things. And you think, oh, yes, my legs are going to look long and lean if I do these Pilates moves with that person. That is not how it goes. Unfortunately, if it were like that, we would all look like certain body types, those of us who exercise. The fact of the matter is that there is so much that we cannot control as far as our results. And I want to start by going through that and then talk about the things that we can control. And this is a little bit of a longer topic, so I'm going to split this into two podcasts. So be sure to subscribe so you also hear the second half next week, which is going to be an important addition because this is not just one thing. So all these promises of do this one exercise. I did this one exercise and all of a sudden fat disappeared. My waist got smaller. My shoulders got amazing. I mean, come on, guys. If it were that easy, wouldn't we just all look amazing, right? Nobody would have a weight problem. Nobody would be under muscled. Osteoporosis would be tossed out of the diagnostic books because we would all just be so strong, right? So this is really getting down to realism. Okay, getting off my soapbox now. All right. So let's talk about the things that you cannot affect. And I a little bit alluded to it a minute ago, which was we cannot affect our genetics. So if I chose 15 women or 20 women and they did exactly the same workouts, I treated them like lab rats, right? They had to do exactly the same workouts. I controlled their eating, all the things. And and then I did that, let's say for a year, they would still end up looking different from one another because we have different genetics. In fact, in the studies that they do on exercise, and these studies come out all the time, they'll often have 12 people, 40 people is a lot. I mean, imagine. And the results really, really vary, and they try to pull out something that they can say about it. So our genetics make a difference. And oh, wow, I have been born with the kind of genetics that really does not put muscle on very easily. And I'm reminded of this so often when I'm in the weight room and I see somebody, a woman, a midlife woman, who looks really toned, muscular, like she's got great muscle definition and everything. And then I look at the weights that she's using, and it's like half the weights that I'm using. And my muscles are not popping like hers are. I remember in college too, there's this one woman, Heather, who was on my lacrosse team, and she like never went to the weight room. And then she came to the weight room with me one time, and she just developed muscles so fast from bicep curling a pencil. It is really unfair. But the thing is that I've talked about type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. So type 1 are the muscle fibers that give us the endurance, and they're quite small and flat. And then there are the type 2 muscle fibers, which give us strength and power. And they are the ones that can grow more significantly in size. And in every single one of us, in every single one of our muscles, we have both type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. And it's not like it's the same proportion for every single one of my muscles. It changes. My bicep muscles might have a different proportion than my thigh muscles or my back muscles. And then my bicep muscles will have a different proportion than your bicep muscles. And that is, of course, going to affect to some degree how big, how prominent our muscles are going to be, how much they're going to show. And then the other piece that's going to matter is that the muscle belly is attached using tendons. It's attached to your bones. And the length of the tendons versus the length of the muscle is going to make a difference too. So if I flex my bicep and I have a different proportion of those two aspects to what you have when you flex your muscle, it is going to like pop up more or less. You'll see people often, if they have a very poppy muscle, it's a shorter bicep muscle, right? So it'll be like flat and then jump and then flat again. And then other people have these kind of longer muscles. So if you talk about long, lean muscles versus poppy muscles or bulkier muscles, muscles that show more, it's probably something to do with that, just your structure, right? And those are two things that you're not really going to be able to affect. I mean, the structure you're not going to be able to affect, for sure not. There is a little bit of evidence that when you do more strength training work, there are certain percentage of those muscle fibers which can be converted over to the other type of muscle fiber. So you could actually have a little bit more of these type 2 muscle fibers, but that takes some serious concerted effort. And I think that's something that bodybuilders worry about more than anybody else. I think for us, we can just think of it as we have the genetics that we were born with. So even if we do the exact same training program as somebody else, we're not going to look exactly like them because of our proportion of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, and because of the structure of our muscles and our tendons, and how long or short they are. And then other things that you're not going to be able to affect are things like your age. So it is actually harder to build muscle when you are older. And So for that reason, we need to have a more structured kind of strength training program to really push our bodies systematically to build the muscle. Plus, our hormone profile is going to affect this to some degree. I mean, if you think about like a young teenager, like my 17-year-old son, he is just oozing with testosterone, so he can go to the gym and build muscle, get stronger more easily than I can at, in midlife at age 54. And then finally, how much you've trained in the past is going to make a difference as well. And this is something you can't affect anymore, but it is kind of an interesting thing to note. So if you have a history of strength training, so maybe when you were in college or in high school or when you were younger, you did strength training and you had muscles, it probably is going to be easier for you to see results a little bit faster than somebody who never has. And if you are somebody who's just got started strength training, you're going to see a change, like a bigger change right there in the beginning as you start training. So probably your first year is going to be your biggest kind of transformation. And then after that, it goes along more slowly. And for those of us who have been training longer, well, I mean, I'm on year 4 and I still wouldn't consider that super duper long, but the change over like the months is much, much more subtle. I mean, even the amount that I increase weights is very, very subtle because we all do have kind of a genetic ceiling, right? I mean, if it were that we could just strength train and keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger at the same rate as what we do right in the beginning when we start strength training, we would be lifting cars. Somebody out there would be lifting houses and apartment buildings. And we know that Superman is only in the comic books. So that is good to keep in mind. So just to summarize, the things that you cannot really affect, which do affect what kind of results you see, are your genetics. So, what is your muscle and tendon structure like, and what type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers you have in your various muscles and through your body. The second is your age. So, it is harder to build muscle when you're older. So, the sooner you can start, the better. The third is how much hormone you have. And the fourth thing is your training history. And it's good to keep in mind when you're looking at social media and you see these people who look amazing that A, they probably have great genetics. That's why they're there, right? And then they may be using some enhancements. And then unfortunately, there is a lot of use of filters nowadays, even in video. It's gotten really, really easy to use and becoming more and more common. So please do not compare yourself to somebody out there in social media. Compare yourself to yourself, right? And think about your own journey and how big of strides you're making in your own fitness journey and improving your own strength, your own amount of muscle, and your own feeling of well being. Okay, so now let's talk about the things that you can affect, okay? And the things that you can affect in the training situation, all right? The first thing is that training, following a program, is always going to bring you better results than random workouts. So if you're showing up in the weight room and you're just, okay, I'll do a bit of this today and I'll do a little bit of that today and oh, a little bit of this, that is never going to get you the same kind of results as picking a program, following it consistently. All right. So get a program, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It's not about mixing it up every day. It's not entertainment. Think of it like brushing your teeth You don't need 16 different ways to brush your teeth. There is one good way to brush your teeth, and you repeat that every day, twice a day, and your teeth stay clean. It's kind of the same thing with weight training. It's just this consistent way of working. But unlike brushing teeth, you do need to progressively overload. And I talked about that in, I think it was last week's episode. Anyway, very, very recently. So if you haven't watched that episode, go back and listen to that one because that is key. In order to get results, you can't just be doing the same exercises with the same weights over and over again for weeks and months on end. That is not encouraging your body to put on more muscle and get stronger. So progressive overload is really, really key. Intensity also matters. So this has to do with pushing your body. Now, the evidence is that you don't need to train to failure in order to see muscle growth, but you should be training close to failure. So within 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 reps of failure. Now, the way I coach women to learn how to lift is to practice going to failure on some of the lifts, the ones that are safe. For example, shoulder presses or bicep curls, tricep extensions, things like that, where you really are not going to hurt yourself even when you go to failure. And the reason you want to do that is so that you learn where that line is. And so you learn to recognize that, hey, I'm almost at failure. I need to stop now. I can tell I don't have another one in me, or I could do maybe one more, but not 2 more. The other way that you can tell if you're getting close to failure is you see the involuntary slowdown of your rep. So if you're able to start with like 1, 2, 3, 4, bicep curls, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you've got this involuntary slowdown, then you know that you're training hard enough. You can video yourself doing a set and then watch how quick your first rep is and your last rep, and there should be a difference. And by the way, if you are having a chat with your friend that you're at the gym with or on the phone while you're training, then you are definitely not lifting with enough intensity. You should have to focus on what you're doing during your sets. Okay, maybe not in your first week or your second week. Well, then you should be focusing very much on your form. But in any case, like it's not like something you do while you're doing something else and expect to get results. Sorry. And then you need consistency. So training 2 to 4 times a week is plenty. So you don't need to be living in the gym. In fact, next week's episode, you'll hear about why that is not a good idea to just live at the gym, but you do need the consistency because actually the way that this works is that the weight training session is a stimulus for your muscle growth to start happening. But there's this kind of relationship, and this happens actually with all kinds of training, that after you train, your body like starts to improve, like your muscle growth starts to go up. And then after some time, you start to lose muscle again. Okay. And I think what have I read? Like the latest ones have been something like even training once a week is enough to maintain your muscle. Of course, this varies by person, right? So you have to take these with a little bit of a grain of salt. But the studies have been that if you train once a week, that's enough to maintain your muscle. And what that implies is that if you're training less than once a week, you are actually losing muscle. Now, that's not to say you should give up because you had to take 2 weeks off because you were sick. My point is just that it is important to make this a habit and to choose a frequency that makes sense for you and that you can maintain over the long term. And 2 times a week is gorgeous, wonderful. So do that. And then the last thing I'll say is that focus on good form. You want to do the exercises correctly so that you're actually targeting the muscles that you want to work to make sure that you're strengthening everything. I see a lot of not so great form going on at the gym, and I wish people would pay more attention to that. Some people get very caught up in, oh, I got to keep increasing my weights, I got to keep increasing my weights, but not at the price of sacrificing form. Make sure you're getting the form down correctly. Plus, if you're not training with good form, for example, if you're doing heavy rows and the reason you're able to complete the reps is because, let's say, you're turning your wrists in instead of actually pulling with your back, then you may end up with issues like wrist issues or something else. So, good form is important too. So, to recap, the things you can do or should do in the weight room to get the most results out of your weight training is follow a consistent program, apply progressive overload. So, you're challenging your body as you get stronger by increasing the reps and increasing the weights over time. Train with intensity. You don't need to go all the way to failure, but getting close to failure is important. Train consistently. So it can't just be 1 week you train, next week you don't, third week you train. Get a rhythm to your training that you can maintain for weeks and months and years on end. Even if that's twice a week, that's plenty. And finally, focus on good form so that you are actually hitting the muscles and working the muscles that we want to be working in that program. And so you're not sacrificing good form and potentially going to injure yourself. All right. So I hope what you take away from this episode is that your results are going to look different from everybody else's results, except maybe if you have a twin sister. I did actually have one client who had a twin sister, and she was like, oh my God. Yeah. So if you and your twin sister both start training with my program, you should see fairly similar results. And then it's the same old kind of boring stuff that I've been talking about for so long. Pick a program, do it consistently, apply progressive overload, train with intensity, and pay attention to your form. And that is how you are going to get the best results. Next week, we will talk about the things you can do outside of the weight room to ensure you get the most out of your training session. Until next time, I wish you happy training.